Florida Panthers are the Stanley Cup champions for the second consecutive year. Brilliant performance. Remember, they were in trouble against Toronto when this whole thing started.
Yeah.
Came back. It's a team of guts. It's a team that is a great two-way team. They're very good defensively. They're very good offensively. Their goaltender, Bobrovsky, who I thought was great when he was in Columbus, is great now with an even better team around him in Florida. I thought that Paul Bissonnette brought up an interesting line of questioning with Gary Bettman that Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the NHL, rejected.
Mm-hmm.
And it is about the tax situation in Florida. Mm-hmm. And I think it's an interesting question for everybody as to if there are advantages in the states of Texas, Tennessee, Florida, because there's no state income tax. And as Gary Bettman said, he said, look, before this run, Florida had only won 4 playoff rounds in its history.
Yeah.
Until now. Now they've won 11 of their last 12.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And, including 8 in a row. But it's an interesting question about, and I brought this up before, when players have been considering, or coaches have been considering, will I coach or play in California, which has a very high tax rate. Years ago, Phil Mickelson complained about the fact that he lives in Southern California near San Diego. And he was talking about, like, the problems of the tax system in California. And he got the, Phil, you're so rich. Like, just knock it off, okay? That's not, okay? He understands he's making money. He also understands you're not, okay? Which means you're still getting taxed by them. And that, I thought it was an interesting question. Now, Gary Bettman, I understand why he said it, but think about it. You've had Tampa Bay and Florida win 4 Stanley Cups between them in this run.
Yeah.
And Tampa Bay's been in 5.
Tampa won 2, then they lost, then Florida lost, then Florida won 2.
Right.
It's been 6 straight.
So 6 straight were a Florida team. Now, let's be straight. Both organizations, I'm talking about organizations, have made the right draft picks, the right trades, the right free agent pickups.
They built the team out
right,
well.
They built the team. The Florida Panthers get to the trade deadline. They acquire Brad Marchand from the Boston Bruins. Right? A few years ago, look, we've got to straighten out the goaltending situation, and they acquire Sergei Bobrovsky, all right, who had been with the Columbus Blue Jackets. You look at Tampa Bay, right? They drafted Andrei Vasilevsky. Right? He was not the primary goalie the first time through, then became the primary goalie, and everybody's like, oh, God, Vasilevsky's great. They have on that roster one of the top defensemen in the game. You look at the players with Stamkos and everybody else that they've had in that group, they're just a well put together team. The only area where I think it comes into play is when does it make a difference to a free agent, whether it's in baseball, which obviously it hasn't helped the Rays or the Marlins.
It's helped out basketball quite a bit.
It's helped out basketball. Orlando's getting people. Miami's getting people. Right? And it's helped them out. Football-wise, we can debate between Jacksonville, the Dolphins, and the Bucs, but let's face it. I mean, the Bucs won a Super Bowl. Miami's been ultra competitive with everybody, and Jacksonville's kept some of its young players. I mean, Trevor Lawrence has a long-term contract there. So, does it make a difference? Has it made a difference in Houston and Dallas? Has it made a difference for San Antonio? We're about to find out whether it's made a difference for San Antonio. I think they're going to take Dylan Harper.
Has it made a difference for the Rangers? Has it made a difference for the Astros? Like, it is, again, you're adding just every sport.
Right.
Like, does it help?
Okay. You're looking at the Astros, of course, have won a couple World Series. The Rangers won a World Series. I mean, Corey Seager was a big free agent pickup. And he goes there. Yes, they paid more money, but his money goes further because he lives in Texas based on the tax laws.
Not only the more money for him at that point may have been like, okay, I'm getting more money, but maybe his situation's better somewhere else. But then you hear, well, the money's going even further. well, I'm getting way more money at that point.
And this isn't anything that the sports themselves can do anything about. They can't do a thing about it. This is a complete external situation. But you have to ask yourself, based on recent champions, is it playing some role? I mean, there's a bunch of champions from Texas. There's a bunch of champions from Florida. Is it playing a role, not in trades and not in drafting?
In free agency.
In free agency, is it playing a role? It's possible. But I only say possible because there's just so many factors.
There's factors in terms of the cap you have, the space you've got, and also the sport you're in. Because in baseball, there is no hard cap. You can basically go as far as you want.
It's a luxury tax.
Yeah, it's a luxury tax.
And the Dodgers abuse it.
Yeah, the Dodgers abuse it. So baseball, could go a further way than it could, let's say, a basketball, where now especially you've got these aprons in place where if you spend over X amount of money, if you're the Heat, it takes your kneecaps off. Well, so it's nowadays it's going to be a little different. But
but imagine how Luka feels. He went from Texas to California.
Oh my gosh!
Hey, all right.
But if you're sitting there as LeBron back in early 2000s, and you're in the mid 2000s, 2010s, he's making the decision. Do you think that probably helped, knowing that Florida had the tax laws it does?
I think it was a bonus. How about that?
Yeah.
In other words, he was determined to go. He made a decision. I want to be completely fair about this because everybody can do all the Entertainment Tonight stuff they want. I think he made a decision because he wanted to win.
He did,
because he actually took less money. People don't realize he actually took less money per year to go to Miami than it would have than the max contract in Cleveland.
Well, that's the thing. He took a lesser salary, but the long run it may have also
he actually may have made more money.
Yeah.
Now Ohio's tax laws I'm not sure about,
but we know Florida.
But we know Florida, Texas, New Hampshire. In other words, Dave O'Brien broadcast the Red Sox. He lives in New Hampshire.
It's right over the border.
Okay, when Tim Neverett was doing the Red Sox, and Tim now does the Dodgers, Tim was living in New Hampshire. Why? There's no state income tax in New Hampshire.
It's pretty good.
Okay, why do you think the commute, with all due respect, from the New Hampshire line down either I-95 or I-93 is just one long line, and Route 3 from the New Hampshire border down, and then in the afternoon back, because you've got enough people now acting as if that is a suburb of Boston. You have to ask yourself how many athletes might be living up in New Hampshire. And that I don't know.
Well,
but I'm saying that this is something that is an ancillary, interesting topic, not an issue. It is not an issue. It's not but it could be a free agent factor when you're talking about comparable. Okay, I got offered 4 years, $20 million to go to San Francisco, as opposed I got offered 4 years, $20 million to go to Dallas. Okay, well, guess what? My money's going to go further where?
Yeah.
Right, and that, in other words, is that a swing factor once in a while? I give Paul Bissonnette a lot of credit because he asked the question.
I'd rather someone ask the question than just sit and say nothing.
It is okay to ask the question. Now, Gary Bettman kind of resented the question. Right. Well,
but it's a fair question to ask.
As a commissioner, I expect him to defend all 30 teams. And also, he was defending how Florida and Tampa Bay built their teams, which he was correct.
Yeah.
Right? But it was a fair question. Is that a question that's asked on the ESPN set?
No.
No, it's not. Okay? Right? What's wrong with Halliburton? Okay. It turns out how the teams are built. Where's your segments on how the teams were built? Where is it? Right? Look, Sam Presti's done an incredible job with Oklahoma City. Okay? He took a guy that was perceived as, and not on this chair, as a star. I've never been a big Paul George, right? As you know. And he parlayed it into everything. I mean, at one point, remember, he had Durant, he had Westbrook, and he had Harden all at one point, right? Oklahoma City had all those guys at one point. And then slowly but surely, it was broken apart, right, by circumstances. But now he's built this.
Well, don't forget, by the way, that Russell Westbrook trade, he traded Russell Westbrook to the Rockets for Chris Paul and 4 potential first-round picks.
And
he swapped them, gave Chris Paul him and Shea Alexander, who just got there at the same time, he said, CP, you mentor Shea for a year. They made the playoffs that year.
They were really
and
good.
Shea got mentored.
Remember,
for a full
people didn't
year.
think Oklahoma City was going to be very good, and they ended up making the playoffs.
They made the playoffs, and Shea got mentored by one of the greatest point guards of all time. He got a full year under him, and Chris Paul has said, like, I've talked to Shea every day, basically.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
It's really good. And again, and same thing with Indiana. Indiana has Sabonis on the team. Good player. Mm-hmm. You know, but they needed a different type of player. So they made the deal, and they sent him and a couple of others to Sacramento, and they got Tyrese Halliburton. Mm-hmm. And that changed the dynamics of that team. And you could see right away in the first in-season tournament, you know, America's gimmick. But it did showcase in America's gimmick that Halliburton was ready to step up and be one of the better players in the league, to the point where people forget, I think, because he didn't play that often. He was actually on the Olympic team last summer.
He was the 15th man, but he said I'd rather be the 15th man than not.
Right. Well, better being the 16th guy. Yeah. I mean, that was Herb Brooks in the Squaw Valley Olympics. He was the guy that got knocked out at the end. And so these are just interesting stories. Mm-hmm. And, you know, is Bissonnette a journalist? No, but he asked a journalist question.
Mm-hmm. That's a question you or I would ask.
Right?
It's a legitimate question.
It was a great question, and it was a question that was asked from the athlete's point of view. Mm-hmm. Right? A reporter may not think of that because they're not in this situation. Now, most reporters now can pick where they live and do their work. I mean, I think I've talked to Dennis Dodd so many times. Dennis, of course, now retired. Mm-hmm. But I think Dennis was living in Kansas, for goodness sakes. That's where he worked out of. Mike DeCourcy now works out of Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. But it's just one of those, it doesn't take anything away from the organizations. It's just something that will be interesting to watch going forward if it is a factor. I just was down at the U.S. Open covering that. Why do all those guys live in Florida and Texas? A, it's warm. Mm-hmm. B, they can play golf anytime. Mm-hmm. And C, they don't have to worry about state taxes.
I believe Tiger lives in Florida, or at least lived.
Yeah, he lives in Jupiter.
Exactly. So Tiger lived down there.
Well, almost all of them live down in the Jupiter area. I mean, why do you think that the team golf concept
is down there?
Why do you think it's down at there? SoFi,
all live there.
Right? It's because they all live there.
Yeah.
Right. That's why. It's just, is it the factor? No, but I think it's an interesting factor, and there's nothing sports can do about it because it just turns out your team is in that state and it's about state laws, and nothing to do with anything else. I believe Philadelphia, though, for example, is one of those cities that has a tax on athletes when they play there.
Yep.
Right? So it's like,
well, they can't help themselves anyway. They're the Sixers. That's a whole different discussion.
No, but I'm saying if you're an out-of-town team, you get taxed for playing there,
which is crazy.
Right? It's different, but again, it's one of those interesting speculative discussions. But who else is having this discussion? And I give him credit for asking the question. And then at that point, Gary Bettman can answer the question any way he wants. Mm-hmm.